to our second essentials on 1st and 2nd Peter. Thank you for joining Colin and me today. Colin, I noticed that the beginning of this passage, what we're looking at, which is the second half of chapter 1, it begins with the word therefore. Is that significant?
It is. That's an important word that we should reflect on for a second, because it speaks to a transition that's occurring. Last week, Peter laid out the promise of the gospel. He laid out the living hope given to us, the inheritance that is never perishes. But here he transitions with therefore, everything I've said. What does that mean for our lives? And how do we live out the gospel as individuals? And so this chapter, section of the chapter that we're reading, is all about application.
Okay, so this is application. And I think interesting here that the sort of first instruction seems to be sort of preparing our minds. And why do you think he goes there?
Yeah, that is fascinating. That's the first thing he says. And other translations, and these are a little more exact, it reads, gird up your minds. The image of antiquity, someone wearing a robe, they would gird up the robe so they could be ready for action. He says, do that with your minds. This idea that as Christians, we are first and foremost to think, right? And to ponder and reflect on this treasure that's been given to us, inheritance. You know, Jesus, when he talks about our anxiety, what does he say to do first in terms of countering that? Well, he says to think, consider the lilies of the field. And so we are always to be peering into and reflecting on the promise that's been given to us and how that impacts our lives.
As I read through these instruction, there's a place that it says that we're supposed to be holy as God himself is holy. And I don't know about you, but it's intimidating to think I'm supposed to be holy like God.
Oh, yeah. He sort of ends these imperatives with this call to be holy, and at first glance it's scary, and it just seems not possible, right? I do think it's helpful to think about what that word means, holy. The word holy, it means to be cut out, to be separated for a purpose. And an example I remember comes from Tim Keller, famous Presbyterian pastor, thinker, preacher who recently died. But he says, imagine that you have a paper you're writing, or maybe a talk, and you're reading the newspaper and you see an article that is a perfect illustration. You need this for your paper or talk. So you cut it out and you put it over here and you paste it into your talk. And that's the vision of what God calls us to. He calls us out of the type of lives we were living, to live in a new way, and to live in a way that's devoted to him and to his service. We've been cut out, and we're being used by God. We're to be holy in that sense, because God, again, is holy. He is separate and different than his creation.
I love that illustration of being cut out. There's one more place that I think can be confusing, perhaps. And it's this idea of, I don't know what your translation says. I have ESV, and it says, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. What is the fear? Are we afraid of God? Is that what he's saying? Where is the fear? And what does it mean?
Yeah, he does seem to tell us to approach God with fear, and I think we don't like that. We don't want to fear God. And, of course, in one sense, we shouldn't fear God because we know of God's immense, incredible love for us. But there is this idea of reverence, to have a reverent fear for God. An example I think of, imagine a child in your home washing, maybe it's your child or grandchild, washing a dish. And you go up and say, that dish has been in our family for 100 years. Be careful with it. They're going to treat it differently. They're going to treat it with reverence because they don't want to break it. We've broken a lot of dishes in our house. And so when we approach God, of course we are to remember that we are approaching a God who is other and who is more. And more than that, and Peter is talking about this, we are in awe of God because of what he's done for us. And that, again, it creates a sense of reverent fear before him. Not of being scared of him, but just a recognition of who he is. And I think we cultivate that most in our worship and in our prayer life. It's something we should seek, a reverent fear of God.
When you say that, it makes me think that is the preciousness of the relationship. Reminds me of a time in my life, when I have had to tell somebody that I love very, very much, that I've done something that I know disappoints them or even hurts them. It's not that I'm afraid I'm going to be hurt by them for that retribution. It's more just the relationship is so precious. I don't want that to happen, that I would have to be in that place. So that's a beautiful understanding of this sort of reverent fear that we have for God because of the preciousness of his love, his ongoing love. If you were just to say, Colin, the way that this scripture has enriched you, a personal way, that in reading this, a phrase or verse or something, what is it?
Well, we just go back to this application to remind us that the gospel is not just a set of propositions that we believe, but again, as we talked about last week, it's alive. It affects us. It changes the way that we live, right? It has a real application in our lives. And we remember that as Peter gives us these instructions. Therefore, do these things because of the incredible thing that God has already done for you in Jesus Christ.
Well, thank you. I have so enjoyed this conversation, and I know you will enjoy your continued conversations in your Essentials group.